My husband called me at 11:17 on a Thursday morning. I know the exact time because I was in a meeting, and I watched his name appear on my phone screen, and I declined it. And then 30 seconds later it appeared again. And the second call is the one you pick up when it comes from someone who never calls twice in a row. I stepped into the hallway. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I need to talk to you." His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Not anger. Not upset in the ordinary way. Quiet in the specific way of a person who has been handed something heavy and has not yet decided how to put it down. I said, "Where are you?" He said, "Home. Mom stopped by this morning." There it was. I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not say anything else to her. Do not respond to anything she showed you or told you. I need you to meet me at an address at 3 o'clock this afternoon." He said, "Sadie." I said, "Please trust me for 4 more hours. Can you do that?" A pause, then, "Yes." I texted him the address. Then I went back into my meeting and sat down and folded my hands on the table and spent the next 40 minutes doing the most disciplined acting of my life, which was pretending to care about a quarterly budget review when what I actually knew was this. My mother-in-law had just made the last move she would ever make against my marriage. And she had made it on the one morning in 3 years that it was guaranteed to destroy her instead of me. The address I sent my husband was my OB-GYN's office. I was 6 weeks and 4 days pregnant when his mother told him I could never give him children. Before I tell you what happened at 3 o'clock, I need to tell you who Alina Callahan was. Because this story did not start on a Thursday morning. It started the day I became her son's girlfriend, and it ran for 3 years underground before it surfaced in our kitchen in the form of a document she had prepared with the specific precision of a woman who had been planning this moment for a long time. She just didn't plan for the part where she was wrong. My husband's name is Daniel Callahan. He is the kind of man who is almost impossible to describe without sounding like you are exaggerating, which I understand is a suspicious quality in a story told by his wife. So I will be specific rather than glowing and let the specifics do the work. Daniel is methodical. He thinks before he speaks. He keeps his word. He remembers what you told him 3 weeks ago and asks about it later, not as a performance of caring, but as the natural result of actually having listened. He makes decisions slowly and then holds them. He is not easily swayed by other people's panic or other people's pressure, which is a quality I loved in him and which, over the 3 years I am about to describe, became the central battlefield of my marriage. Because his mother's primary strategy was to make him panic, to make him doubt, to apply pressure in the specific way of a woman who had spent 40 years learning exactly how her son's mind worked and where its pressure points were. Alina Callahan. I want to describe her accurately because she deserves accuracy. She was 61 when this story ends. She was a small woman, compact and precise in her movements, with Daniel's dark eyes and none of his stillness. She was never still. She filled rooms with her presence in the way of people who have decided that their comfort is the room's primary responsibility. She dressed well. She spoke clearly. She was, to people who met her once or twice, charming in the controlled way of someone who has chosen exactly how much of herself to offer as an introduction. I was 27 when I met Daniel. He was 30. We met at a work event. He was in project management. I was in communications, different companies, same industry conference. We talked for 2 hours at a cocktail reception, and he asked for my number at the end of the night in the direct way that I found, after years of men who were indirect about everything, enormously appealing. We dated for 11 months. We got engaged. We were married 14 months after that. I met Alina on our 3rd date. Not because I was introduced on the 3rd date, because she appeared. Daniel and I were at a restaurant, a Saturday lunch, and she walked in with a friend and I watched the recognition cross her face when she saw us. Later, Daniel said he had not told her we would be there. Later, I decided I was not entirely sure that was true, which is not a conclusion I reached immediately. It took time. With Alina, everything took time to understand. She operated slowly, patiently, in layers. She was warm to me that first meeting, interested in my work, my family, the city I had grown up in. She asked good questions. She listened with her whole face. I thought, this is a woman who loves her son and wants to know the person he is bringing into his life. I was right about the first part. The first signal came 6 weeks later. Daniel and I had been at his parents' house for Sunday dinner. His father, a quiet man named Gerald who had clearly made his peace decades ago with the fact that his wife contained more weather than he did, made excellent roast chicken and very little conversation. Alina cooked, served, directed, and narrated the meals simultaneously. I helped where I could and was redirected gently but firmly each time. Not my kitchen, not my rhythm. The message delivered in the warmest possible tone. After dinner, Alina and I were in the kitchen while Daniel and Gerald watched something in the living room. She was rinsing dishes. I was drying. She said, without looking up from the sink, Daniel has always been very focused on having a family. It's important to him. Children, a home. He's been that way since he was small. I said, I know, we've talked about it. I want the same things. She looked at me then, a brief look assessing. She said, good. He deserves someone who is completely sure. She handed me a plate to dry. The conversation moved to something else. I stored that exchange without fully labeling it. It was a small thing, a mother expressing what her son needed. I had said the right thing. She had seemed satisfied. What I understand now, which I did not understand then, is that the conversation was not about my answer. It was about the establishment of a theme. Alina was introducing, in the mildest possible way, the subject she intended to return to, planting it early, before I knew it was planted. She was a patient woman. She played long games. Over the following months, the theme returned. Not always directly, Alina was rarely direct in her undermining, which is part of what made it so difficult to name. It came in questions. Have you two talked about a timeline? It came in observations. Daniel always assumed he'd have children by 35. It came in stories. My friend's daughter waited too long and then had such a hard time. Such a shame when that happens. Always the same subject. Always delivered warmly. Always deniable as concern rather than pressure. I talked to Daniel about it once, early in our engagement. I said, your mother brings up children a lot, every time I see her. He said, she's excited about grandchildren. She's not subtle about it. I said, it feels like more than that. He said, she's just eager. She doesn't mean anything by it. He was not dismissing me. He genuinely believed this. He had grown up inside Alina's patterns, and they were, to him, simply the weather of his family, present, occasionally intense, not malicious. He did not have the outside perspective that would have let him see them differently. I let it go. I wish I had pressed harder. I also understand why I didn't. There is a particular paralysis that comes with early marriage and a mother-in-law who is always technically within the bounds of acceptable behavior. She had not done anything I could point to directly and say, this is wrong. She had planted seeds. She had established a theme. She had made me aware, repeatedly and gently, that she was watching my performance as a future mother with specific attention. I could not prove any of it, and Daniel loved her. So I let it go, and I watched, and I waited for her to show me more of her hand. She showed it eventually. They always do. Daniel and I got married on a Saturday in June. The wedding was small, 40 people, an outdoor ceremony at a vineyard an hour from the city, dinner under string lights afterward. It was exactly what we wanted. Simple, present hours. Alina wore ivory. Not white ivory, a shade she would later describe when my mother quietly mentioned it as champagne. A shade that in photographs, in the June afternoon light, read as white in every single image. Daniel said I was being oversensitive when I mentioned it. I let it go. The wedding was beautiful. I was married to a man I loved. One ivory dress was not the story. The story started 3 months later. We were at Sunday dinner, a ritual Alina had instituted monthly, the first Sunday of every month, non-negotiable in the way that Alina's preferences were always non-negotiable while being presented as invitations. I had learned to attend without resistance because resistance cost more energy than attendance. She said over dessert while Gerald ate his pie in peaceful silence, so, any news? Daniel said, About what? Alina smiled, the smile of a woman who finds other people's obliviousness charming. She said, "You've been married 3 months. A woman just wants to know if there's any news." I said, "We're enjoying being married first." The smile stayed. She said, Of course you are, there's no rush." There is no rush was the thing she said every time for the next year. Every Sunday dinner. Every phone call with Daniel that I was present for. Every family gathering. There is no rush, followed by a pause that contained the entire weight of her meaning, which was, there is absolutely a rush and you are running out of time and I am watching. Daniel, for his part, was patient with me and consistent about what he wanted. He wanted children. We had discussed it before we married, a real discussion, with specifics and timelines, not a vague romantic agreement. We had said, let's have a year together first, settle into being married, then start trying. We were trying by our first anniversary. What I did not tell anyone, not Daniel, not my own mother, not my closest friend, was that the trying was not going the way I had expected. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because what was happening during those months was private. It was mine and Daniel's and nobody else's. And what Alina did with the knowledge she eventually pieced together from the outside was a violation of something that was not hers to touch. We had been trying for 7 months when I went to my OB-GYN for a routine check. She ran some baseline tests. She referred me to a specialist. The specialist ran more tests. There were some findings, nothing conclusive, she said. Nothing that foreclosed the possibility of pregnancy, but some indicators that could present challenges. We might want to be patient. We might want to consider options if the natural route continued to be slow. I took this information home. I sat with it for 2 days. Then I told Daniel. His response was the response of the man I had married. He said, "Okay, we figure this out together. What do we need to do?" Not panic, not grief, not what does this mean for us, just, we figure this out together. What do we need to do? I loved him so much in that moment that it was almost difficult to be in the room with it. What we did was continue. We adjusted our approach based on the specialist's recommendations. We were patient. We had hard months and better months and months where we did not talk about it at all because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a hope is leave it alone. And somewhere in this, somehow, through channels I have never been able to fully reconstruct, Alina learned that we were having difficulty. I do not know precisely how she found out. Daniel says he did not tell her. I believe him. My theory, which I have never been able to prove, is that she asked Gerald's sister, who is a nurse, to ask leading questions at a family gathering. I have a clear memory of a Christmas conversation with Gerald's sister where she asked about our plans in a way that felt clinical rather than curious. I answered vaguely. But vague answers to a skilled questioner are still answers. Alina learned that the process was not going smoothly. And she began, with the patience of a woman who plays long games, to build something with that information. The shift happened gradually, the way Alina's shifts always happened, below the threshold of what could be named, above the threshold of what could be ignored. The tone changed at Sunday dinners. The "there is no rush" disappeared. In its place came a new register, quieter, more careful, the specific gentleness of someone delivering what they believe to be difficult truth. She said things like, "I just want Daniel to have what he's always wanted." And, "I hope you two are talking about all your options." And once, unforgettably, when Daniel was in the other room and Gerald was in the garden, "Have you considered whether you're being fair to him, Sadie?" Letting this go on. I said, "What does that mean, Alina?" She said, "I just mean, he wants a family so much. And if there's something that's making that harder than it needs to be, he deserves to know everything. All his options." I said, "He does know everything." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, Good, of course." She picked up her wine glass. The subject moved. I went home that evening and I told Daniel exactly what she had said. All of it, word for word. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "What will you say?" He said, "That our family planning is our business and I need her to stay out of it." He said it, I believe he said it. Alina received it with the specific grace of a woman who knows when to retreat in order to advance more effectively later. She apologized to Daniel. She said she had overstepped. She said she was just worried. She said it would not happen again. It did not happen again in the same way. It happened in new ways. She started calling Daniel more often. Not about us, never about us directly after the conversation. She called about other things. His father's health, which was fine. Family logistics. Small things that required his attention and gradually redistributed his energy and presence in ways I felt but could not quantify. He is devoted to his family. She knew exactly which strings to pull. She also started the document. I did not know about the document until the Thursday morning, but I have since understood, from things Daniel uncovered afterward, that she spent several months constructing it. She had found, I do not know how, I suspect it involved someone in a medical-adjacent field who should have known better, a template for what appeared to be a specialist's letter. She had populated it with enough accurate-sounding medical language to be convincing to a non-medical reader. She had used a name that was close to, but not identical to the name of the actual specialist I had seen, counting on Daniel not to look closely in the first moments of shock. She had created a document stating that I had been diagnosed with a condition that made natural conception impossible, that I had been aware of this for 2 years, that I had chosen not to disclose it to my husband. She had, in other words, created proof that I had deceived the man I loved about the most important thing he wanted. And on a Thursday morning, when I was 6 weeks and 4 days pregnant, she drove to our house and sat down at our kitchen table and slid it across to her son. I have reconstructed this part from what Daniel told me afterward, in detail, because I was not there. I was in a meeting. I was in a meeting while my mother-in-law was dismantling my marriage at our kitchen table. Alina arrived at 8:45. Daniel was working from home that day. He had a late morning meeting and no reason to be in the office before noon. She texted first, "Just in the neighborhood, can I stop by?" He said yes. He made coffee. She sat across from him at the table I had chosen, in the kitchen we had designed together. She said, "I need to show you something. I want you to know that I love you and I have thought for a long time about whether to tell you this." She paused. She said, "I know about Sadie's diagnosis." Daniel said, "What diagnosis?" She slid the document across. He read it. He is not a man who reacts quickly to large things. He read the document twice. He sat with it. He asked his mother where she had gotten it. She said a source she trusted. He asked what source. She was vague, someone who had come across it, someone who cared about him. She could not say more. She had prepared for this question with another question. Does it matter where it came from if it's true? Daniel sat with the document for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to call Sadie." Alina said, "Of course, I'll wait." She stayed. She sat at our kitchen table and waited while he called me. I want you to understand what she was counting on. She was counting on a specific sequence of events. Daniel calls me. I deny it because it is false, and denial is the only response available to me. Daniel, caught between a document with medical language and a wife's denial, becomes uncertain. Alina is present to provide comfort and guidance through the uncertainty. The uncertainty grows. The marriage fractures. She wins. She had a 20-year understanding of her son's psychology, and she had constructed this move with precision. What she had not calculated was the appointment. I had scheduled my 8-week OB-GYN appointment 3 weeks earlier. Routine prenatal visit, confirmation of dates, first ultrasound. I had not told Daniel yet, not because I was hiding it, but because I had wanted to confirm everything was progressing normally before making it real with words. We had been through enough uncertainty that I had learned to wait for confirmation before celebration. The appointment was at 3 o'clock that afternoon. When Daniel called me at 11:17, I had known about the pregnancy for 2 weeks. I had been carrying the quiet, private knowledge of it through every day, past his mother at Sunday dinner 6 days earlier, through every ordinary morning and evening of our life, waiting for the Thursday appointment to make it official. His mother chose Thursday morning. I am not a religious woman, but I have thought many times since then about the particular architecture of that timing. She chose the one morning that guaranteed her exposure. She could not have known. She was simply, finally, wrong about the moment. When I told him to meet me at 3 o'clock and gave him the address, he did not know what the address was. He looked it up after we hung up because he is methodical, because he needed to understand where he was going. He searched the address. He saw the name of the practice. He told me later that he sat at the kitchen table with his mother across from him, and he understood in that moment what the afternoon was going to contain. He did not say anything to her. He put his phone face down on the table. He said, "I'm going to go get some air. You should go home, Mom." She said, "Daniel." He said, "Please go home." She left. He sat in our kitchen for 2 hours, and then he drove to the address I had given him. I arrived at the practice at 2:50. Daniel was already in the parking lot. He was sitting in his car, and he got out when he saw me pull in, and we stood in the parking lot in the November cold and looked at each other. His face was doing something complicated. Not anger, not at me. Something that was waiting, carefully, to understand what it was feeling before it became anything definite. He is that kind of person. I said, "I'm going to show you something, and then I want you to ask me anything." He said, "Okay." We went inside. My OB-GYN is a woman named Dr. Fiona Reyes. She is measured and warm and precise in exactly the combination that I needed during what had been a complicated year of hopping. When we came in together, Daniel and I, him quiet and me carrying the particular stillness of someone who knows what is coming. She read the room without commentary and proceeded with the appointment. She confirmed dates. She asked routine questions. She prepared the ultrasound equipment. Daniel sat in the chair beside the exam table. He had not said much since the parking lot. He was watching everything with the careful attention of a man who is gathering information before he allows himself to feel it. The image came up on the screen. Dr. Reyes said, "There," and she pointed. A small form. Unmistakable once you know what to look for, and Dr. Reyes had been guiding patients to the right thing to look for 20 years. She said, 6 weeks and 4 days, right on schedule. Strong heartbeat, do you want to hear it? I looked at Daniel. His face had stopped doing the complicated thing. It had become something else, something simpler and much larger. He said, "Yes." The sound filled the small room. That particular rapid rhythm, faster than you expect, steady as something that has already decided to be here. Daniel put his face in his hands. Not from grief, not from anything bad. From the specific overwhelm of a person who has been holding something heavy all day and has just been told he can put it down. Dr. Reyes looked at me with the professional discretion of a woman who has been in rooms like this before. She excused herself to give us a moment. I said, "I was going to tell you Thursday evening. I wanted to wait for the confirmation." He said, still with his face in his hands, "She came on a Thursday morning." I said, "I know." He looked up. His eyes were wet. He said, "Is the document real?" I said, "No. I want you to ask Dr. Reyes. I want you to see my actual file. Everything I have, every test, every result, every appointment, I want you to see it today. Not because I owe you the proof, but because I want you to have it." He said, "I don't need to see the file, Sadie." I said, "I want you to anyway. I want there to be nothing between us that she put there." He nodded. Dr. Reyes came back. Daniel asked to see my complete file. She walked him through it with my permission, every result, every specialist note, the actual clinical picture of the past year, which was not a picture of impossibility. It was a picture of difficulty and uncertainty and the particular kind of hope that refuses to calculate its own odds. It was not what his mother's document said it was. Not even close. We left the practice at 4:15 with a photograph, small, grainy, the specific unremarkable miracle of an 8-week ultrasound image, and we sat in the parking lot for a while without going anywhere. Daniel said, "I never fully believed it." I said, "I know, but it still happened." He said, "I know." We sat in the quiet of the parking lot until the cold got into the car. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. I need to pause here. Because what happened in that parking lot phone call is the part of this story that I have thought about the most in the years since. And before I tell you, I want to ask you something. Has someone ever handed you the exact moment that proved them wrong? Not a moment you created or planned for, just a moment that existed because the truth existed. And you realized that the truth had been protecting you all along. Tell me in the comments. Drop your city and the time it is where you are. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Signed and Silent yet, please do it now. Hit the bell. This story is not over. Daniel called his mother from the parking lot of my OB-GYN's office. I sat in the passenger seat. He had asked if I wanted to wait inside. I said no. I said, I spent 3 years on the outside of conversations she had with you about me. I would like to be present for this one. He accepted that without argument. He dialed. She picked up on the second ring. She had been waiting, I imagine, for hours, for his call, for an update, for some confirmation that her morning had accomplished what she intended it to accomplish. Her voice, when she answered, had the careful warmth of someone who has prepared for a specific conversation. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I need you to listen without speaking until I'm finished. A pause, then, okay. He said, I just left Sadie's OB-GYN. She is 6 weeks and 4 days pregnant. I heard the heartbeat. I reviewed her complete medical file with her doctor present. The document you gave me this morning does not reflect anything in her actual medical history. Not one word of it is true. Silence. He said, I need to understand what you did, not why you thought it was justified, what you actually did. Did you create that document? A longer silence. Then, carefully, I was given that information by someone I trusted. He said, who? She said, I can't, I was protecting you. He said, you sat at my kitchen table and you tried to make me believe my wife had been lying to me. You tried to make me doubt my marriage. You gave me a document that you either made or paid someone to make. And you did it on the same morning that my wife had her first prenatal appointment. His voice through all of this was steady, not raised, the specific steadiness of a person who is very, very angry and has decided that anger will not be given the controls. He said, I want you to think about what you were willing to do, not to Sadie. To me, you were willing to break my marriage, to take away something real, to replace it with a lie, because you decided you knew better than I did about what my life should look like. Eleanor said, Daniel, I only ever. He said, I know what you were going to say. I've heard it for 30 years. I know the sentence. And I am telling you that I do not want to hear it right now. I am going to need some time. I will call you when I am ready to talk. He said, congratulations. You're going to be a grandmother. He hung up. The parking lot was very quiet. The November afternoon was gray and still. Through the windshield, I could see a woman walking to her car with a small child on her hip, the child pointing at something above them, the woman looking up, both of them looking at whatever it was. Daniel put his phone in the cup holder. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel. He said, I owe you an apology. I said, you don't. You didn't believe it. He said, I wasn't sure for a little while. That's enough. I said, 4 hours, Daniel. She's been working on you for 3 years. 4 hours of uncertainty is not a failure. He turned and looked at me. He said, when did you find out about the pregnancy? I said, 2 weeks ago. I was going to tell you tonight. He said, 2 weeks. I said, I wanted to wait for the appointment. I wanted to be sure. He looked at the ultrasound photograph in my hand. The small, grainy image of something that had been there, quietly, through all of this morning. Present and real while his mother sat at our kitchen table and told him it didn't exist. He said, she was in our house. I said, I know. He said, while you were sitting in a meeting knowing you were pregnant and I was. He stopped. He put his forehead against the steering wheel for a moment. Then he sat up. He said, let's go home. We did not leave the document alone. I want to be clear about that. We did not decide that the confrontation in the parking lot was sufficient and move on. That is not the kind of story this is. 3 days after the Thursday, Daniel retained an attorney. Not because we were certain what the legal landscape looked like. Neither of us knew at the outset what, if any, legal exposure Alina had created. But because Daniel is methodical and the situation required understanding, and understanding required a professional. The attorney's name was Marcus Webb. He specialized in civil matters with a particular focus on defamation and fraud. Daniel brought him the document. He brought him a written account of the morning, the phone call, and the full history of Alina's behavior over the preceding 3 years, which Daniel had asked me to document in writing over the previous 2 days, not because he doubted it, but because documentation is how Daniel processes things that require action. Marcus Webb looked at the document for a long time. He said, "This is a fabrication. Whoever created this used a real medical practice's letterhead format, but the identifying details are slightly wrong. The license number, the address format. It would pass a casual read but not a verification." He said, "The question is who created it. If your mother-in-law created it herself, that's one set of considerations. If she paid someone in a medical field to create it, that's another. Either way, presenting a fabricated medical document to a spouse with the intent to damage a marriage constitutes, at minimum, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Depending on the specifics, it could reach defamation. The document makes specific false statements about your wife's medical condition and her honesty." Daniel asked, "What are our options?" Marcus said, "You can pursue a civil claim. You can also report the document to the relevant medical licensing board since it misrepresents a licensed medical professional's findings. Or both." He said, "Or you can use the threat of those options as leverage to establish a clear boundary." Daniel said, "What do you recommend?" Marcus said, "Tell me what outcome you want." Daniel said, "I want my mother to understand, completely and without ambiguity, that what she did was not acceptable and will not happen again. I want it in terms she cannot reframe as concern or love or good intentions." Marcus said, "I can help you do that." What followed was a letter. Not filed, not submitted anywhere, delivered directly to Alina by Daniel himself, in a meeting that I was not part of and which Daniel has described to me only in summary because some parts of it belong to him and not to me. He sat across from his mother at her kitchen table, the same position she had occupied at ours, and he gave her the letter and he sat while she read it. The letter outlined, in Marcus Webb's careful legal language, what the document Alina had presented was, what it was not, and what the consequences of similar actions in the future would be. It described the legal exposure she had created. It included a formal acknowledgement that she was required to sign, a written statement that the document she had presented was not obtained from any licensed medical professional and did not reflect any actual medical finding. She signed it. Daniel told me she cried. He told me it was the kind of crying that contained genuine remorse alongside genuine fear, and that he had sat with both without collapsing into comfort or hardening into coldness, which is the specific emotional balancing act that only a person who loves someone and is also furious at them truly understands. He came home with the signed acknowledgement. He gave it to Marcus Webb. He gave me a copy. I have it. I keep it not as a weapon. I have no interest in weapons, but as a document, a record, a piece of paper that says, this happened, this was real, and it was accounted for. What Daniel did next is the part of this story that I think about most when I think about who I married. He did not cut his mother off. I want to say that clearly because I think the instinct of many people hearing this story is to expect that ending, the clean severance, the declared estrangement, the definitive before and after. That is a satisfying ending. It is not always the true one. What Daniel did was establish conditions. He told his mother that there would be no contact with us, with me specifically, but also with him on subjects related to our marriage or family. That was not invited. He told her the monthly Sunday dinners were suspended indefinitely. He told her that any future relationship with our child would be contingent on demonstrated change over a period of time that he would define, not her. He told her, I love you. I am your son and that does not change. And what you did was not love. Love does not fabricate evidence. Love does not try to destroy what the person you love has built. What you did was control. And I am 41 years old and I am done being managed. He told me all of this in our kitchen that evening, sitting across the table from me with his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold while he talked. When he finished, I said, How do you feel? He said, like I should have said it 10 years ago. He said, I kept thinking she would stop on her own, that she would adjust. To you, to us. I kept waiting for her to see what I saw when I looked at our life. He said, she didn't, and I kept not saying the thing I needed to say because she is my mother and I did not want to hurt her and those are real reasons. They just weren't good enough reasons. Not anymore. I said, you said it now. He said, I said it because of you, because of what she was willing to do to you, to us. He picked up his cold tea, looked at it, put it down. He said, I keep thinking about you. In your meeting, knowing you were pregnant, knowing I had called, sitting there for 40 minutes doing whatever the meeting required while all of that was. He stopped. I said, I knew what I had at 3 o'clock. I just had to get there. He said, you were so calm on the phone. I said, I had 4 hours to be anything other than calm. Calm was the only useful option. He looked at me in the way that he looks at me sometimes, not romantically, not in the heightened way of grand gestures. In the steady way, the way that means I see you, specifically you, and I chose correctly. I said, we should eat dinner. He said, yes. We made dinner, we ate it. We talked about ordinary things, the pregnancy, the timeline, what we needed to do next in terms of practical preparation. We did not talk about Alina again that evening. There was nothing left to say about Alina that evening. We had said what needed saying. The rest was time. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in July. She is the kind of baby who arrived with a clear sense of her own presence, not loud, not demanding, just definitively here. She has Daniel's dark eyes, and what my mother says is my expression, which apparently is the expression of someone who is already working out what they think about something. We named her June, not for any complicated reason. We both just liked it. It suited her. Alina has met June once. At 6 weeks old, a brief visit, scheduled and supervised and limited to 1 hour. She held her granddaughter and she was, in that hour, entirely herself in the best sense, present, attentive, the grandmother she had always said she wanted to be. Daniel watched from the doorway. I sat beside Alina on the couch. There was no performance in any of it, not from me, not from her. Just a woman holding a baby and the particular quiet of a room where everyone present understands that what is happening is provisional. That trust is being rebuilt from a very low point. That there is a long road, and this is one step on it, and nobody is pretending otherwise. When the hour was done, Alina handed June back to me. She stood. She put on her coat. At the door, she paused. She said, Sadie, I owe you more than I know how to say. I looked at her. She is 61 years old and she looked smaller than she used to, which is not a cruel observation but a true one. The specific smallness of a person who has had a held belief removed from them, the belief that they know best, that their love entitles them to determine the shape of other people's lives. I said, I know. She nodded. She left. Daniel closed the door. He stood with his hand on it for a moment, the same way my mother stood at her door once, after something difficult, the posture of a person finishing something. He turned around. June was in my arms looking at the ceiling with her characteristic expression of working out what she thinks about it. He said, You okay? I said, yes. He came and sat beside us. We sat there, the three of us, in the house that was ours, and I thought about a Thursday morning in November and a phone call at 11:17 and a parking lot in the cold and a heartbeat in a small room that had been there, steady and real, through everything his mother had tried to put between us. She had tried to tell him I could not give him this. She had tried to make him believe the thing he most wanted was being hidden from him by the person he loved. She had been wrong. not because I had done anything clever or planned any revenge, because the truth was already present. It was already in the room. It had been in the room for 6 weeks and 4 days, waiting quietly for 3 o'clock. All I had done was give it the right address. I want to tell you the last thing. A few weeks after June was born, I was sitting on the back porch in the early morning while she slept and Daniel slept, and the neighborhood was the specific quiet of a summer morning before anyone has started their day. Coffee, bare feet on the warm wood. The yard we had been meaning to do something about for 2 years, still unmown and overgrown and somehow exactly right. I thought about Alina. I thought about the 3 years of it, the Sunday dinners and the careful questions and the slow, steady pressure of a woman who had decided she knew the shape my life should take and was going to correct it until it fit. I thought about the document, the fabricated letter with the slightly wrong license number and the careful medical language, and the conclusion that I had been lying to the person I loved. And I thought about the particular quality of a Thursday morning in November, about being in a meeting with my phone face down on the table and the knowledge of a heartbeat 6 weeks old in my body, about 4 hours of patience, about an address. Alina had spent 3 years trying to prove that I was wrong for her son. She had spent months preparing a document designed to be the final proof. What she did not understand, what she could not have understood, because she was looking at me from the outside and had decided she knew what she saw, was that the truth does not need preparation. It does not need a document. It does not need to argue its case or defend itself or outlast the lie. It just needs to be present. And it was present. It had always been present. In the room, in the marriage, in the body, in the heartbeat. Present and quiet and completely patient. She drove to our house on a Thursday morning with a folder. The folder was already obsolete. If you are in something right now, something where someone is working hard to make the people around you doubt what you know to be true, I want you to hear this. You do not have to out-argue the lie. You do not have to expose it or defeat it or win a confrontation with it. You just have to be present. You just have to keep being what you are, doing what you know, showing up to the 3 o'clock appointment. The truth has better timing than the lie. It always does. That is my story. If it reached you, if it made you feel something real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Signed and Silent if you haven't. New story every week. I will see you in the next one. I want to tell you what that year of trying actually felt like, because I have told you the facts of it, and the facts are not the full picture. The full picture is this. Every month has a particular shape when you are trying to start a family, and it is not working the way you expected. It has a first half that is ordinary, your life, your work, your marriage, the accumulation of Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings that make up a life. And it has a second half that is different. That is waiting in a specific way, with a specific quality of attention, the kind of attention you cannot turn off even when you want to. Daniel and I were good at protecting each other through it, not in a performed way, in the natural way of two people who have decided that the other person's peace is worth protecting, and who have the particular discipline to act on that decision even when it is inconvenient. We did not dwell. We did not make it the subject of every dinner. We did not let the waiting become the weather of our house. But it was there. Underneath everything, the specific low hum of a hope that has not resolved itself into certainty. I carried it to work every morning. I carried it to Sunday dinners at Alina's table, where the theme of her careful questions had shifted, but the subject had not. I carried it through the tests and the appointments and the specialist's careful language about indicators and challenges and patience. And I carried it, without knowing I was carrying it differently, through the 2 weeks before the Thursday. When I found out I was pregnant, I was alone. Daniel was traveling for work 2 days, a client in another city unremarkable except for its timing. I took the test at 7 in the morning in our bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time with the result in my hand. What I felt was not what I expected to feel, not the surge of joy from the stories, not the immediate overwhelming happiness that people describe. What I felt was something quieter, more like recognition. The specific feeling of something that has been hoped for so long that its arrival feels less like a surprise and more like a completion. Like a sentence that has been waiting for its period. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for 20 minutes. Then I got up, I made coffee, I went to work. I called my OB-GYN from my car in the parking structure and made the first appointment. 3 weeks out, standard timing for early confirmation. I put the date in my calendar under a code that only I would understand, and I did not tell anyone. Not my mother, who would have been my first call in any other situation. Not my closest friend Margaret, who had been with me through the previous year and who deserved to know. Not Daniel, who deserved to know most of all. I held it for 2 weeks. I carried it to work. I carried it to a dinner party at a friend's house where I declined wine and said I was on antibiotics and watched the evening go on around me with the particular warm detachment of someone who is holding a secret that changes everything. I carried it to the Sunday dinner 6 days before the Thursday. I sat at Alina's table. I ate her food. I answered her careful questions about our plans and our timeline with the same careful vagueness I had deployed for 3 years. I watched her watch me and I thought, you've been trying to shape a story for 3 years. The story is already written. You just don't know it yet. I did not know what Thursday morning would bring. I did not know she had the document ready. I did not know the timing she had chosen. But I knew the appointment was Thursday afternoon. And I knew that whatever she was planning it into a week that already had its answer in it. I want to tell you about a conversation Daniel and I had 3 weeks after the Thursday. Because I have told you what happened in sequence. The call, the parking lot, the letter, the signed acknowledgement, but I have not told you what it cost him. And it cost him something real, and I want to be accurate about that. We were in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. June was not yet born. She was still 4 months away, still the quiet, constant presence of a pregnancy that had moved, after the Thursday, from private hope to shared reality. I was making eggs. Daniel was at the kitchen table with coffee and the particular stillness he has when something is working in him below the surface. He said, "Can I tell you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "When I read the document, before I called you, there was a moment where I thought, what if it's true?" He said, "Not a long moment." But it was there, and I've been carrying it since because I don't know what it means about me that it was there at all. I turned around, I looked at him. He said, "She's my mother. She's been telling me things my whole life and most of them have been true, or true enough. And she's been building toward this for a long time. I could feel it, but I couldn't see it clearly. And when she put that document in front of me, part of me just received it, for a moment, before the other part of me said no." He said, "The other part of me said no immediately, but the first moment was there." I said, "Daniel." He looked at me. I said, "You had a document in front of you. You called me within minutes. You asked me to trust you for 4 hours, and then you showed up to the address I gave you. The moment of doubt is not the story. What you did with it is." He said, "I should have needed no moment." I said, "You're human. She is your mother and she has been working on you for years. One moment of doubt in the face of a fabricated document is not a failure of love." He said, "You're being generous." I said, "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." He looked at his coffee. He said, "I keep thinking about all the years before Thursday. All the Sunday dinners where I told myself she was just eager, she was just concerned, she didn't mean anything by it. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt and she kept banking it." He said, "I think I failed you. Not on Thursday, in all the years before it." I set the eggs aside. I sat down across from him. I said, "You didn't fully see it. That's not the same as failing me." He said, "I could have looked harder." I said, "Yes, and you didn't, and I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter because it does. But I also know why you didn't, and I know who you are, and I know what you did when you finally saw it clearly." He said, "I signed us up for a very complicated family situation." I said, "You also showed up to a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon and cried when you heard a heartbeat." He almost smiled. I said, "We're even." He said, "We're not even." I said, "We will be." He reached across the table. I put my hand in his. Outside, the Sunday morning street was going about its business. The particular ordinary piece of a day with nothing required of it. We sat like that for a while, not saying anything else, not needing to. I want to tell you what the first year after June was born looked like, because stories that end at the birth are missing something. The birth is not the end. It is a different beginning, and beginnings have their own texture. The first 3 months were the specific, beautiful chaos that every new parent describes and no description fully captures. We were tired in a way that has its own particular quality. Not the tired of illness or depletion, but the tired of full presence, of being needed completely by something small and new that requires everything you have and gives back something unquantifiable. Alina was not present in those months, by her own choice, or by the weight of the conditions Daniel had set, or by some combination of both. She sent a gift when June was born, a beautiful one, chosen carefully, the specific gift of a woman who was trying to say something she did not know how to say in words. I accepted it in the spirit I believed it was sent. My own mother was with us for 2 weeks. She cooked and cleaned and held the baby while I slept and asked nothing of me except that I let her help, which is the specific gift of the right kind of love. I was grateful in a way that felt newly weighted, the gratitude of someone who has spent time in proximity to the other kind and has learned, by contrast, what it feels like when love does not have conditions. Daniel and his mother spoke on the phone occasionally during those months. I know this because he told me and because we had agreed, when we set the conditions, that there would be no secrets between us about his family. He told me the calls were short, that she asked about June and did not push for access, that she was, in his assessment, doing the work he had asked her to do slowly, imperfectly, without guaranteed outcome. He said once, "I don't know if she can change. I don't know if what she did comes from something deep enough that it can't be shifted, but I'm going to find out before I decide." I said, "That's fair." He said, "Is it fair to you?" I said, "She is June's grandmother. June will decide, eventually, what she wants from that relationship. My job is to keep the door open enough that she has the option, not to keep it open so wide that it becomes a risk." He said, "That's very measured of you." I said, "I've had a year of practice being measured." He said, "You've had 3 years." I said, 3 years and 4 hours. He smiled at that, the full one, the real one. We were sitting on the back porch. June was asleep in the baby monitor on the table between us. The yard was still unmown and overgrown, and we had recently decided to hire someone to do something about it, which felt like a small but real act of having arrived somewhere. I looked at the yard. I thought about the Thursday, about the parking lot, about a heartbeat in a small room. I thought about Alina at our kitchen table with her folder, about the document she had prepared, about the specific precision with which she had tried to dismantle something that was already in the process of becoming more itself than it had ever been. I thought, you tried to tell the story, but the story was already in progress. You just weren't in the room where it was being written. June made a sound on the monitor. Not a cry, a small settling sound, the sound of a sleeping baby adjusting. Daniel and I both looked at the monitor. Then we looked at each other. He said, "She sounds like she's commenting on something." I said, "She has opinions. They're developing." He said, "She gets that from you." I said, "She gets it from the woman who sat in a meeting for 40 minutes on a Thursday morning and did not say a single word of what she was thinking." He said, "That's a high bar." I said, "She'll clear it." We sat on the back porch in the July evening until the light went and the fireflies came out over the unmown grass, and June slept in the monitor between us, opinionated and certain and entirely, completely, irrevocably here. The Sunday dinner 6 days before the Thursday deserves its own telling, because I have mentioned it, but I have not given it the weight it carries in my memory. It was a November Sunday. Cold, the specific still cold of early November before the wind picks up and makes it dramatic. I wore a gray sweater. Daniel drove. We had the radio on and did not talk much, which was normal. We have always been comfortable with quiet in a car, which I consider one of the small but real measures of a good partnership. Eleanor's house was warm. Gerald had made a fire. The table was set the way Eleanor always set it, precisely, every detail considered, nothing accidental. She fed people well. Whatever else was true about her, she fed people well and meant it. We sat down. Gerald poured wine. I accepted a glass and held it without drinking, which I had been doing for 2 weeks, the practiced slight adjustment of a woman carrying a secret in plain sight. Eleanor watched me with the attention she had always paid me, the specific watchful quality of a woman who had been looking for something in my face for 3 years. I had learned to give her nothing to read. Not coldly, just cleanly. The face of a person who has decided their interior weather is their own. The meal was good. The conversation was ordinary. Gerald talked about a project he was following in the news. Daniel talked about work. I asked Eleanor about a friend she had mentioned, a small act of care that I had maintained throughout, because whatever she was to me, she was Daniel's mother, and I had always understood that treating her with basic courtesy was not weakness, but strategy and also just decency. After dinner, clearing the table, Eleanor came to stand beside me at the kitchen counter. She said, very quietly so that only I could hear, "I hope things are going better. For you too." I said, "Things are wonderful, Eleanor. Thank you." She looked at me, a long look. The look of a woman who has a folder at home and knows she is going to use it in 6 days. I looked back. The look of a woman who has an appointment at 3 o'clock on Thursday and knows exactly what it contains. Neither of us said anything else. We finished clearing the table. In the car on the way home, Daniel said, "You were quiet tonight." I said, "I'm just tired." He said, "Good tired or bad tired?" I said, "Good tired." He reached over and put his hand over mine. I looked at the road ahead and I thought, 6 more days. I could do 6 more days. There is something I want to tell you about the 3 years before the Thursday, because I have described them as a story of endurance, and they were that. But they were also something else. They taught me something about patience that I did not have language for until after. Patience is not waiting. This is the thing I learned. Waiting is passive. It is time passing while you hold still and hope the situation changes. Patience is different. Patience is active. It is continuing to be yourself, to do what you know, to show up to the appointments you have scheduled, to hold the things that are real with the same careful grip, while the noise around you tries to convince you that the real things are not real. Eleanor spent 3 years making noise. She was very good at it. She knew her audience, her son, and she played to him with the accumulated knowledge of a 40-year relationship. She timed her moves. She chose her angles. She built toward a document that she believed would be the definitive noise, the noise loud enough to drown out everything else. What she did not account for was that the real thing was not affected by the noise. The pregnancy did not become less real because she had a folder. The marriage did not become less true because she had a document. The heartbeat at 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon did not beat differently because of what had happened at 8:45 that morning. The truth is not a fragile thing. This is what I learned. It does not require defense or constant maintenance or the right conditions. It requires only that you continue to show up to it, that you do not let the noise convince you it isn't there. I showed up to the 3 o'clock appointment. That is the whole of what I did. Everything else, the documents exposure, the parking lot phone call, the letter, the signed acknowledgement, the slow, careful work of the year that followed, everything else came from that one act of continuing to be what I was and do what I knew. She brought the noise. I brought the address. The address was enough. I think about her sometimes, Eleanor, in the quiet moments, not with bitterness anymore, with the complicated tenderness that I imagine is the honest version of forgiveness, not the clean resolution of a feeling, but the ongoing practice of holding it correctly. She is June's grandmother. She tried to take apart something real because she was afraid of losing her son to it, and the fear was real even if the action was unforgivable. And I am learning to hold both of those facts in the same hand without needing them to resolve. June will know her grandmother. on terms that Daniel and I will define together in ways that protect what we have built. That is not cruelty. That is the specific, careful love of parents who have learned what happens when love does not have the right structure around it. My father-in-law Gerald came to visit last month. He sat in our kitchen and held June for an hour and said almost nothing, which is exactly who he is. And when he left, he shook Daniel's hand at the door and then he turned to me and said, "She is beautiful, Sadie. Thank you." I said, "Thank you for coming, Gerald." He nodded. He left. Daniel closed the door. He said, "I think that was the most words my father has said to you in 4 years." I said, "Quality over quantity." He laughed. We went back to the kitchen. June was in her chair watching us with her characteristic expression of working out what she thinks about everything. The yard was finally getting sorted. A man named Pete came on Tuesdays. The grass was no longer a decision we were avoiding. It was just grass now. Ordinary, taken care of, belonging to a life that had found its shape. I made coffee. Daniel set the table. June observed. Outside, an ordinary Tuesday morning proceeded without event. Inside, everything was exactly as it should have been.